How medieval peasants survived the coldest winter. In the chill of the late Middle Ages, a time period spanning from the 5th to the 15th century, the lives of the peasantry were marked by their struggle against the elements. The winters were especially brutal, and survival was far from guaranteed. In this first part of our journey through history, we will explore the means by which these hardy individuals braved the harshest season of the year. The first line of defense against the cold was their homes. Peasant homes during the Middle Ages were simple structures, often comprised of just one room where eating, sleeping, and all other daily activities took place. The walls were typically made of wattle and daub, a combination of wooden strips interwoven with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. This provided some insulation against the cold, but it was far from perfect. The houses were heated by a central hearth, around which the family would gather. The fire would burn all day long, fueled by wood or peat, and the smoke from the fire would escape through a hole in the roof. This constant source of heat was vital for survival, providing warmth and a place to cook food. Clothing was another crucial aspect of survival in the cold winter months. Medieval peasants wore layers of clothing made from wool, hemp, or flax. The most common garment was the tunic, a simple, loose-fitting garment that covered the body from the shoulders to somewhere between the hips and the ankles. This was worn over a shirt or undergarments, and in the winter, multiple layers would be worn for added warmth. Cloaks, hoods, and gloves were also common, providing additional protection against the cold. One of the biggest challenges faced by medieval peasants during the winter was the scarcity of food. Most peasants were farmers, and as such, their diet was largely dependent on the crops they grew. The main staples were grains such as barley, oats, and rye, which were used to make bread, porridge, and ale. During the summer and autumn, the harvest would be plentiful, and the peasants would preserve as much of the food as they could for the winter months. This was done through drying, smoking, and pickling, techniques that allowed the food to be stored for long periods without spoiling. Livestock also played a crucial role in the peasant diet. Cows, pigs, and chickens were the most common types of livestock, providing milk, meat, and eggs. However, keeping these animals alive through the winter was a challenge. The animals required food and shelter, and the peasants would have to balance the need to feed their families with the need to keep their livestock alive. Often, this meant slaughtering some of the animals in the autumn and preserving the meat for the winter. Despite these challenges, medieval peasants found ways to make the most of the winter months. They would gather in their homes around the fire, telling stories and singing songs to pass the time. They would also engage in winter sports such as ice skating and snowball fights, activities that provided a welcome distraction from the hardships of daily life. In conclusion, survival for medieval peasants during the coldest winter was a combination of preparation, resourcefulness, and community. Their homes, clothing, and food were all designed to provide as much warmth and sustenance as possible. Despite the harsh conditions, they found ways to keep their spirits high and persevere through the cold. This resilience is a testament to the strength and adaptability of these individuals, who faced the challenges of their time with courage and determination. As we journey further into the lives of these medieval peasants, we will see this resilience demonstrated time and again, a beacon of hope in the darkest of winters. The winter of 1315 was no ordinary winter in medieval Europe. It was the beginning of a period known as the Great Famine, a period that would last until the summer of 1317, and one of the coldest and harshest times in recorded history. The winter was so severe that it was referred to as the Year of the Great Cold, or the Year of Ice. But how did the medieval peasants, the common folk of the time, survive this ferocious winter? What were their strategies, their methods, their secrets? The first thing to understand about medieval peasants is that they were largely self-reliant. They didn't have the luxuries of central heating or grocery stores. They had to rely on their own skills and resources to survive. They had to store food, make and repair clothing, build and maintain their homes, and they had to do all of this while also working the land and raising livestock. One of the most important resources for surviving the winter was food. During the autumn harvest, peasants would have worked diligently to gather as much food as possible. This included grains like wheat and barley, as well as vegetables like cabbages, onions, and turnips. They also gathered nuts, berries, and fruits from the forest, and if they were lucky, they might have had some livestock like chickens or pigs to provide them with meat and eggs. All of this food would have been carefully stored to ensure it lasted through the winter. Grains were particularly important. They were the staple of the peasant diet and could be stored for long periods. The grains would be ground into flour and used to make bread, the most common food in the medieval diet. Bread was eaten at every meal, often with a little cheese or some vegetables. In particularly harsh winters, when food was scarce, bread might be the only food a peasant family had. Clothing was another crucial resource for surviving the winter. Medieval peasants didn't have the luxury of modern materials like synthetic fibers or down feathers. Instead, they relied on what was available to them: wool, linen, and animal skins. Wool was the most common material for winter clothing. It was warm, durable, and relatively easy to work with. Peasants would shear their sheep in the spring and then spend the summer and autumn spinning the wool into yarn and weaving it into cloth. The clothing they made was simple but effective. They wore tunics and leggings, often layered for extra warmth. They also wore cloaks, hoods, and mittens, and they wrapped their feet in strips of cloth to protect them from the cold. These clothes were not just for warmth, they also served as protection against the wind and snow, which could be just as deadly as the cold itself. Shelter was equally important for surviving the winter. Medieval peasant homes were simple, usually consisting of a single room with a thatched roof, and walls made of wattle and daub, a mixture of mud, straw, and dung. The homes were not particularly well insulated, but they did provide some protection from the elements. To keep warm, peasants would have a fire burning in the hearth, which was usually located in the middle of the home. The fire served multiple purposes. It provided heat, of course, but it also served as a source of light and a place to cook food. Firewood would have been gathered throughout the year and carefully stored for winter. Peasants would also burn peat, a type of soil that can be dried and used as fuel if they had access to it. Surviving the winter was not just about having the right resources, it was also about knowing how to use those resources effectively. Peasants had to be strategic in their use of food, clothing, and fuel. They had to ration their supplies to ensure they lasted throughout the winter. They also had to be vigilant about maintaining their homes and their clothing, repairing any damage quickly to prevent heat loss. Despite the harsh conditions and the scarcity of resources, medieval peasants were remarkably resilient. They knew how to survive, how to adapt, how to make do with what they had. They knew how to face the winter and come out the other side. It was a testament to their strength, their resourcefulness, and their determination. As we delve deeper into our journey through the past, let us pause to appreciate the resilience of the medieval peasant. Imagine, if you will, a world without central heating, weather forecasts, or supermarkets. A world where survival depends on the fruits of your own labor, and the whims of weather could mean the difference between a bountiful harvest or a barren field. This was the reality for peasants living through the coldest winters of the Middle Ages. With the harvest season coming to a close, the villagers would have spent the long autumn days gathering and storing food for the harsh winter months ahead. Hay would be stacked high in the barns to feed the livestock, and root vegetables like turnips and carrots would be carefully stored in cool, dry cellars. The fruits of the summer, such as apples, pears, and berries, would be transformed into preserves and pies, their sweetness a welcome respite in the long, cold winter. Yet preparing and storing food was merely the first step in surviving the winter. Fuel for heating and cooking was just as important. Throughout the year, peasants would collect wood from the surrounding forests, fallen branches, and twigs. This wood would then be carefully stored and rationed throughout the winter months. Fire was a precious resource, providing warmth and light in the long, dark days and nights. It was also essential for cooking the hearty stews and broths that would sustain the villagers through the winter. The homes of medieval peasants were simple structures, usually made of wattle and daub. Wattle and daub was a composite building material made from woven wooden strips called wattle, which was then covered with a sticky material known as daub, usually a mixture of clay, sand, and straw. These homes were not particularly well insulated, and the only source of heat would be the central hearth. To keep warm, Families would huddle together, sharing body heat, and thick furs and cloths would be used to cover doors and windows to keep out the cold. Clothing, too, was an important factor in surviving the winter. Wool was the most common material for clothing, as it was warm and relatively easy to produce. Peasants would raise their own sheep for wool, which would then be spun into yarn and woven into cloth. The women of the village, in particular, would spend long winter evenings spinning and weaving, creating warm clothing for their families. But winter was not just a time of hardship and survival. It was also a time of communal bonding and celebration. The long, dark nights were filled with storytelling, singing, and dancing. These activities not only helped to pass the time, but also served to strengthen the bonds within the community. Celebrations such as Christmas and the New Year brought a sense of joy and festivity to the bleak winter landscape. In this way, the medieval peasant not only survived, but thrived despite the harsh conditions of the coldest winters. Their resilience, resourcefulness, and communal spirit allowed them to face the winter with strength and determination. As we lie here, warm and comfortable, let us take a moment to appreciate the struggles and triumphs of these hardy ancestors. Their stories serve as a reminder of the power of human spirit and the ability to find joy and beauty, even in the harshest of circumstances. So, as we continue on this historical journey, let us carry with us the lessons of the medieval peasant. Their ability to adapt and survive in the face of adversity is an inspiration to us all. And as we listen to the wind howling outside, let us give thanks for the comforts and conveniences of our modern world. As we drift off to sleep, let us dream of warm hearths and hearty stews, of simple homes filled with laughter and song, and of a community united in the face of adversity. As we journey into the past, let us also journey into a deeper appreciation of our present and a greater understanding of our place in the grand tapestry of history. As the sun sunk below the horizon, the winter night laid its icy shroud over the medieval village, and the peasants retreated into their humble abodes. These homes were built primarily of timber, wattle, and daub, providing a modicum of protection against the intense cold. The daub, a mixture of clay, dung, and straw, had insulating properties that were quite effective in keeping the cold at bay. The floors were typically made of packed earth, a seemingly harsh and unforgiving surface, but a layer of straw or reeds was often strewn across it, offering a semblance of warmth. Within these homes, the peasants' furniture was sparse and utilitarian. A rough-hewn table and a few stools typically comprised the entirety of their furnishings, but the centerpiece of the home was the hearth, a life-giving source of warmth, light, and sustenance. The hearth was a place for cooking, a place for gathering, a place where stories were told and songs were sung. The crackling fire was a beacon of hope in the long, dreary winter months. Winter brought with it a dearth of fresh food, but the medieval peasants were well acquainted with the art of preservation. They salted, pickled, and dried their produce and meats, ensuring they had enough sustenance to last through the cold season. In addition to these, grains stored from the autumn harvest were ground into flour and made into hearty breads. Root vegetables such as turnips, parsnips, and carrots were stored in cool, dark places to prevent them from rotting. Furthermore, they relied heavily on their livestock, not just for meat, but also for milk, cheese, and wool. The peasants were also resourceful in their clothing. They spun wool into yarn and wove it into coarse but warm cloth. Layering was key to surviving the winter. They wore multiple layers of these woolen garments and often lined them with fur or leather for additional insulation. Footwear was also essential in maintaining body heat. They made shoes and boots out of leather, stuffing them with straw or fur for added warmth. The winter, despite its harshness, was not just a season of survival, but also a time for celebration. The Christmas season was a time of great festivity for the medieval peasant. It was a time for feasting, for dancing, for merriment. The Yule log, a massive piece of wood, was burned in the hearth, and its warmth and light were symbolic of hope and rejuvenation. The peasants believed that as long as the Yule log burned, they would be protected from the evils of winter. Winter was also a time of rest for the peasant. The fields lay dormant under a blanket of snow, and there was little work to be done. This provided them with a much-needed respite from the grueling labor of the other seasons. They used this time to mend their tools, to weave and sew, to craft and create. The village would come together during this time, sharing stories, sharing food, sharing warmth. It was a time of community, of camaraderie, of shared hardship and shared joy. The cold winter nights were long and the days were short, but within the confines of their humble homes, around the warmth of the hearth, the peasants found comfort and solace. In the face of the harshest winter, the medieval peasant was a testament to resilience and resourcefulness. They understood the rhythm of the seasons, the ebb and flow of life. They knew the winter was a time of hardship, but they also knew it was a time of rest, a time of celebration, a time of community. They understood that the winter was not just a season to endure, but a season to embrace. As we delve deeper into the life of the medieval peasant, we can see that while their existence was indeed harsh and fraught with difficulties, it was also a life of simplicity, of community, and of resilience. Despite the challenges that winter brought, they persevered, they adapted, they endured, and in doing so, they left us with a legacy of strength and fortitude that continues to inspire us today. Our journey into the lives of the medieval peasants during the coldest winters continues, and in this segment, we'll delve into the heart of their homes, the humble abode that offered them shelter, warmth, and a semblance of comfort amidst the harsh conditions. The peasant's house, often a one-room structure made of wattle and daub, provided a haven from the winter's biting cold. Wattle and daub was a composite building material used for making walls, in which a woven lattice of wooden strips, the wattle, was daubed with a sticky material usually made of some combination of wet soil, clay, sand, animal dung, and straw. The houses were typically small, the average being around 10 by 15 feet, but they were sturdy, warm, and waterproof, thanks to the ingenious use of readily available materials. The roofs were thatched using straw or reeds, providing insulation against the cold. Inside this humble dwelling, there was a central hearth which provided heat for cooking and warmth. The smoke from the fire would rise and escape through a hole in the roof, which also allowed for some natural light to filter in. The house was sparsely furnished with a rough-hewn table, some wooden stools, and a straw mattress providing the basic comforts. The floor was often just a bare, hard-packed earth, sometimes strewn with straw for additional insulation and warmth. Despite these modest trappings, the peasant's house was a sanctuary, a place of refuge against the brutal winters that would often last many months. Food during these cold months was scarce, but not entirely absent. The peasants would have harvested their crops in the fall and stored them for the winter. They relied heavily on grains such as barley, oats, and rye, which could be ground into flour and baked into bread. They also grew vegetables that could withstand the winter cold, such as cabbages, turnips, and onions. Beans and peas provided a vital source of protein, while apples and pears could be stored for long periods. The peasants also kept livestock, which provided them with milk, cheese, and occasionally meat. Chickens offered eggs, and pigs, which were often slaughtered in early winter, provided meat that could be salted and smoked for preservation. Hunting and foraging supplemented their diet with wild game, fish, berries, and nuts, adding variety and vital nutrients. The cold winter months were also a time for certain types of work. The men would engage in woodcutting, not only for firewood, but also to provide timber for building and repairing houses, fences, and farm tools. The women, besides their relentless work in the house, would also engage in spinning and weaving, producing wool and flax for clothing and bedding. Despite the harsh conditions, the peasants found ways to cheer themselves during the long winter nights. Storytelling was a popular pastime, with tales of heroism, romance, and magic. These stories, handed down from generation to generation, provided entertainment, moral instruction, and a sense of identity. This resilient survival of the medieval peasants during the coldest winters speaks volumes about their unwavering spirit and resourcefulness. The warmth of their hearth, the sustenance of their stored harvest and livestock, the shelter of their humble abode, and the unity of their community formed the bulwark against the biting cold and the biting scarcity. The next time you find yourself shivering on a cold winter's day, spare a thought for these hardy souls of yesteryears and their enduring legacy. Let us now navigate to the heart of the medieval village, where the peasants, the backbone of the medieval society, resided. When the winter months rolled in, their lives transformed, dictated by the harsh elements. Imagine the scene as the first snowflakes started to fall, covering the ground in a blanket of white. The once bustling village square became desolate and quiet, save for the crackling fires emanating from the cottages, smoke billowing out from their chimneys. The cottages themselves were humble structures, built from local materials. In areas abundant in timber, wooden planks were used for the walls and roof. In regions with less timber, they resorted to a technique called wattle and daub, where woven wooden strips were plastered with a mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung. The roofs were typically thatched using straw or reed, providing a decent insulation against the cold. A central hearth provided warmth and a place to cook, with the smoke escaping through a hole in the roof. The peasants' diet also shifted with the seasons. During the summer months, they enjoyed a diverse range of food, including fresh fruits, vegetables, and dairy products. In winter, however, their diet mainly consisted of preserved foods. Drying, smoking, and salting were common methods of preservation. Meat, if they were fortunate enough to have it, was salted and smoked. Fruits and vegetables were dried or stored in root cellars. Grains were milled into flour for bread, and legumes were a valuable source of protein. Winter was also a period of relative rest for the medieval peasant. The fields were barren, and there was little work to be done on the farm. However, this did not mean they were idle. The peasants used this downtime to mend tools, repair buildings, and weave cloth. Women spent long hours spinning wool into yarn, a task that could be done by the fire's light. They also made candles from animal fat, which would provide light during the dark winter nights. The cold, although harsh, also brought with it certain benefits. For instance, the ground's freezing made it easier to transport heavy loads. Logs, stones, and other heavy materials could be dragged over the frozen ground with relative ease. The frozen rivers and lakes also provided a means for travel and transport. In fact, in some regions, ice roads formed an extensive transport network during the winter months. In terms of clothing, the peasants layered themselves to combat the cold. They wore tunics made from wool or hemp, and cloaks were common. Footwear was typically made from leather, stuffed with straw for additional insulation. Hoods, mittens, and scarves protected them from the biting wind. The wealthy could afford fur, but for the average peasant, warmth came from layered clothing and huddling together for warmth. Peasants also found solace and warmth in their community during the harsh winter months. They gathered around the hearth, sharing stories and songs, passing down traditions and folklore. It was a time for kinship and camaraderie, a time to strengthen the bonds of the community. The church also played a crucial role, providing spiritual comfort and sometimes physical aid to the most vulnerable. Despite the challenges, the medieval peasants' winter was not a time of despair. Instead, it was a time of resilience, a testament to their ability to adapt and survive in the face of adversity. They found ways to thrive, relying on their resourcefulness, their community, and their indomitable spirit. As we conclude this section, picture once again the snow-covered medieval village, the cottages with their smoke-filled chimneys, the peasants huddled together for warmth. Their lives were not easy, but they persevered, finding joy and warmth even in the coldest winter. As you drift off to sleep, let their resilience inspire you, reminding you of the strength within us all. In the midst of the harshest winter, the medieval peasant's life was a testament to human resilience and the determination to survive. The coldest months tested their mettle, pushing them to the brink, yet they found ways to endure and persist. This section will delve into the different techniques and strategies that the medieval peasants employed to withstand the freezing temperatures and keep the biting cold at bay. Firstly, let's consider their homes, mostly made from wattle and daub, a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. These insulated structures were the first line of defense against the cold. The walls were thick and sturdy, providing a barrier against the icy winds. The roofs were thatched with straw or reeds, offering further insulation. Inside, the floors were covered with rushes or straw to provide a degree of insulation from the cold ground. A central hearth provided heat and a place to cook food. It was a simple yet effective design, capitalizing on the materials and resources at hand to create a warm and comfortable living space. Next, we need to look at how they dressed. Layers were the key to survival. Peasants wore undergarments made of linen, while the outer layers were usually wool, a material known for its excellent insulating properties. A thick woolen cloak would be draped over the shoulders, providing an additional layer of warmth. In addition, they would wear mittens or gloves and wrap their feet in cloth or wear wooden clogs to protect them from the freezing ground. These pieces of clothing provided the much-needed warmth during the coldest days and nights. Food was another critical factor in their survival. The peasants' diet consisted mainly of grains, legumes, vegetables, and occasionally a small amount of meat. During the winter, they relied on preserved foods like pickles, dried fruits, cured meats, and grains stored from the autumn harvest. These foods were hearty and nutritious, providing the energy needed to withstand the cold. They also brewed ale and mead, which were thought to provide warmth, and in some cases, might have been the only source of safe drinking water when sources froze over. Firewood was a crucial resource during the harsh winter. Gathering and storing enough firewood before the onset of winter was a priority for every family. The wood was used to heat their homes and cook their food. It was a continuous cycle of gathering, chopping, and storing, done with the knowledge that their survival depended on it. In the midst of these harsh conditions, social structures and community bonds played a significant role in survival. Villages operated as a collective unit, sharing resources and labor. If a family couldn't gather enough firewood, for example, their neighbors would step in to help. This sense of community and mutual aid was a lifeline for many during the coldest winters. Lastly, the church played a significant role in the survival of the medieval peasants. The church provided spiritual guidance, but also physical support. It often acted as a storehouse for grain and other foodstuffs, which could be distributed to the needy in times of scarcity. The medieval peasants' struggle to survive the coldest winter was fraught with challenges. Yet, through ingenuity, resilience, and community support, they found ways to endure. Each year, when spring arrived, it was a testament to their strength and determination, a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity in the face of adversity. As we move on to the next section, we will delve deeper into the role of the church and the spiritual beliefs that helped the medieval peasants navigate the harsh realities of their daily lives, especially during the coldest winter. As we delve deeper into the life of a medieval peasant during the winter season, it becomes clear that their existence was a careful balance of survival tactics, community cooperation, and an intimate knowledge of their environment. This harsh season was a test of endurance and ingenuity, where success meant seeing the advent of spring. During these relentless winters, shelter was of utmost necessity. The homes of peasants, also known as hovels, were typically constructed from wattle and daub, a mixture of mud, straw, and manure, which provided surprisingly effective insulation against the biting cold. The roofs were thatched with straw, reeds, or rushes, offering a modicum of warmth and protection from the snow. A central hearth would be kept alight as much as possible, both for warmth and cooking purposes. The hovel was often filled with smoke as they lacked chimneys, and this would escape through a hole in the roof or the door. Fuel for the fire was a crucial resource during winter. While wood was the ideal choice, it was often scarce due to deforestation and the Lord's restrictions on gathering from the local forest. Peasants would resort to using dried peat, animal dung, or even twisted straw, referred to as fire bundles. These alternatives produced less heat and more smoke, making the living conditions in the hovel less than ideal, but it was a necessary compromise for survival. Medieval peasants, despite their impoverished status, were astute in their understanding of preserving food for the winter. Autumn was a flurry of activity as they harvested grains, fruits, and vegetables, curing meats, and making cheese. Grains were milled into flour and stored for making bread, while fruits and vegetables were pickled or dried. Livestock, unable to be sustained through the winter, were slaughtered, and the meat was salted or smoked to prevent it from spoiling. Cheese was made from the milk of cows and goats, providing a high-calorie food source that could be stored for months. These preserved foods formed the basis of the peasants' winter diet, supplemented occasionally by hunting or fishing. Hunting and fishing were not always reliable food sources during the winter months. Many animals hibernated or migrated, and bodies of water often froze over, making it difficult to catch fish. However, peasants could trap small game like rabbits or birds, and ice fishing was a common practice. They would cut a hole in the ice and lower a line baited with pieces of meat or bread. If they were fortunate, this would provide a much-needed source of fresh protein during the lean winter months. Community was key in surviving these long, harsh winters. The feudal system, rigid as it was, fostered a sense of shared responsibility among the peasants. They worked together to gather and store firewood, repair and reinforce their homes against the winter storms, and share food resources. The lord of the manor also had a vested interest in the survival of his serfs, as they were his primary labor force. Therefore, in particularly harsh winters, the lord might distribute extra rations or offer shelter in the manor house itself. Religion also played a significant role in the peasants' winter survival. The medieval church was a powerful institution and provided both spiritual and practical support. Prayer and faith were seen as crucial tools for survival, and many winter festivals and traditions had religious significance. Moreover, the church often acted as a source of charity, providing food and clothing to those most in need during the winter months. The trials of a medieval winter were undoubtedly harsh, and the threat of illness, hunger, and cold was ever present. However, through a combination of practical skills, community cooperation, and religious faith, the medieval peasant found ways to endure and survive. Their resilience and resourcefulness in the face of such adversity are testament to the human spirit's capacity to adapt and overcome. In the next section, we will explore more about the social and cultural aspects of the medieval peasant's life during winter, including festivities, leisure activities, and how they made use of the limited daylight hours. Their lives were not merely about survival, but also about finding joy and meaning amidst the hardship. This is an aspect of their existence that is often overlooked, yet it offers valuable insight into the human experience during this fascinating period in history. As the medieval winter drew on, the peasants adapted their daily routines to the ebbing daylight and the deepening cold. They woke at dawn, as always, but dawn came later and later as the solstice approached. They had to make the most of the daylight hours, squeezing in as much work as possible before nightfall, when the only light available was the dim glow of the hearth fire or the feeble flicker of a rushlight. During the day, the men ventured outside to tend to the animals, chop firewood, and carry out any necessary repairs to the buildings or fences. Their clothing was simple, often just a woolen tunic and trousers, with a cloak or shawl for extra warmth. They wore wooden clogs on their feet, stuffed with straw to provide some insulation against the cold ground. Despite the harsh conditions, they worked hard, driven by the knowledge that the survival of their family and their village depended on their efforts. Meanwhile, the women stayed indoors as much as possible, where it was warmer and they could keep an eye on the children. They were busy with their own tasks, cooking, cleaning, spinning, weaving, mending, but they also had to make sure the fire was kept burning, both for heat and for cooking. They used a variety of fuels, from firewood and peat to dried cow dung, whatever was available. Keeping the home fires burning was a vital task, and it was carried out with a quiet sense of duty and determination. The children had their own roles to play in the family's survival. The older ones helped with the chores, both indoors and out, while the younger ones played near the hearth, staying warm and safe under their mother's watchful eye. Sometimes, they would be sent out to gather firewood or to fetch water from the well, tasks that could be accomplished quickly and without straying too far from the safety of the home. Food was scarce in winter, and the peasants had to make do with what they had stored away during the harvest season. They ate a lot of bread, made from barley or rye, and supplemented this with whatever vegetables they had managed to preserve, such as onions, turnips, and cabbages. Meat was a rare treat, usually reserved for special occasions, but they might have a little cheese or milk from the family cow. They also ate a lot of pottage, a thick, hearty stew made from whatever ingredients were available. It was not a varied diet, but it provided the necessary calories to keep them going through the cold winter months. In the evenings, they gathered around the fire for warmth and companionship. They told stories, sang songs, played simple games, and perhaps enjoyed a little homemade ale or cider. Despite the hardships, they found ways to amuse themselves and keep their spirits up. The long, cold winter nights could be a time of hardship, but they could also be a time of closeness and camaraderie, a time when the bonds of family and community were strengthened. As the winter wore on, the peasants faced many challenges. They had to deal with the cold, the scarcity of food, and the threat of disease. They had to work hard, and they had to rely on each other for survival. But they also found ways to enjoy themselves, to make the most of what they had, and to celebrate the simple joys of life. Then, as the days began to lengthen and the first signs of spring appeared, they prepared for the new growing season. They repaired their tools, cleaned their fields, and planned their crops. They looked forward to the warmth and abundance of summer, but they also knew that they had survived another winter, and that gave them a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction. So, as we conclude this section, we are left with a vivid image of the resilience and tenacity of the medieval peasants. Despite the harsh conditions and the many challenges they faced, they found ways to survive and even to thrive. They were a testament to the human spirit, and their story is a reminder of the strength and resilience that lies within us all. As we drift into sleep, we carry with us the stories of these hardy souls, their struggles and triumphs, providing a soothing lullaby of human resilience and hope. In the midst of the chilling winter of the Middle Ages, the survival of the medieval peasants hinged upon a delicate balance of foresight, physical labor, and the mercy of the elements. A peasant's existence was one of ceaseless toil and hardship, and winter was an especially taxing season. The frosty months were not just a period of biting cold and shorter days. They were a time fraught with the threat of starvation, disease, and even death. The peasants had to utilize all their resources and knowledge to make it through the harsh winter months. The medieval peasants' preparations for winter began long before the first frost. In the late summer months, the peasants were busy harvesting their crops, knowing that the bounty gathered would be their primary source of sustenance during the winter. Grains such as wheat, barley, and rye were harvested and stored in granaries, their golden kernels promising sustenance in the bleak months ahead. These grains were ground into flour and baked into bread, a staple in the medieval peasants' diet. Without these gathered crops, the harsh winter would become a death sentence. Along with the grains, the peasants also harvested vegetables like cabbages, turnips, and onions. These were stored in cellars or pits, cool and dark places that would keep the vegetables from rotting. They also gathered fruits and berries, which were preserved for winter by drying or making them into preserves. These fruits and vegetables were not just a source of food, but also provided much-needed vitamins and nutrients that helped keep disease at bay during the winter months. Yet, even with such preparations, the winter was a challenging time. The peasants had to contend with the dwindling daylight hours and the relentless cold. A typical medieval peasant's house was a simple one-room structure with walls made of wattle and daub, a mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung. A thatched roof provided some insulation from the cold, but it was the hearth, a fireplace in the center of the house, that was the primary source of heat. Firewood was essential for the winter, providing heat and a way to cook food. Throughout the warmer months, the peasants would gather wood, chopping down trees and gathering fallen branches. This wood was carefully stacked and stored, ready to feed the hungry hearth when the cold set in. The fire was a lifeline, its warmth a bastion against the icy fingers of winter that sought to creep into every corner of the peasant's home. The bitter cold was not the only danger that winter brought. Snow and ice made travel hazardous, isolating villages and making it difficult to trade or seek help. The peasants had to rely on their community, sharing resources and helping one another to survive. They would huddle around the fire, sharing stories and songs to lift their spirits, their breath clouding in the cold air. The firelight would flicker, casting long shadows on the walls, a small beacon of warmth and life in the gloom of winter. Winter was also a time of disease. The close quarters and poor sanitation meant that illnesses could spread quickly. Common ailments included respiratory infections, brought on by the cold and damp, as well as malnutrition-related diseases. The peasants had to rely on their knowledge of herbs and natural remedies to combat these illnesses, as professional medical help was often out of their reach. Despite these challenges, The medieval peasants found ways to endure the winter. They relied on their ingenuity and resilience, their strong sense of community, and their deep connection to the land. Their lives were shaped by the seasons, their survival a testament to their tenacity and resourcefulness in the face of adversity. As the first signs of spring began to appear, and the icy grip of winter began to thaw, they would breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that they had once again survived the coldest season. So, as we delve further into the harsh winters of the Middle Ages, let us remember the resilient spirit of the medieval peasants, their struggles and their triumphs, for they were not just victims of their time, but survivors, their lives a testament to the enduring human will, to survive and thrive, even in the harshest conditions. Their story is not just a tale of survival, but a testament to the indomitable human spirit, a testament to our shared history. As the sun set, the winter nights in a medieval peasant's life were long, cold, and often fraught with hardship. The temperature would drop rapidly, and the darkness would descend upon the land, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold that would seep into every corner of their modest homes. Their homes were often single-room structures, with walls made of wattle and daub, a mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung, which provided some insulation against the cold, but not enough to keep it at bay entirely. The floors were made of compacted earth, covered with straw or reeds for warmth. The roof was thatched with straw, which was an effective insulator but could also be a fire hazard. There was usually a central hearth for cooking and heating, but the smoke often filled the room as there were seldom proper chimneys. The lack of ventilation could lead to respiratory problems, particularly in the young and the elderly. Their beds were typically made of straw or dried ferns, covered with a cloth or animal hide. It was common for the entire family to sleep together for warmth, layered in whatever clothing they had, often sharing their living space with their livestock, whose body heat provided additional warmth. The domestic animals were not just essential for sustenance, but also played a vital role in providing heat during the bitterly cold nights. In these challenging conditions, the peasants' diet played a crucial role in their survival. Their food was simple but hearty. The mainstay of their diet was dark bread, made from rye or barley. Root vegetables like turnips, parsnips, and onions were common, as were cabbages and leeks. They also ate peas, beans, and lentils, often made into a thick, warming pottage, a kind of stew made from whatever ingredients were available, cooked over the open hearth. They preserved food for the winter months by drying, smoking, or salting. Meat was a rarity, usually only eaten on special occasions or during the winter, when it was too costly to keep feeding the animals. And it was during these cold months that they could tap into their carefully preserved stores of food. The livestock that could not be maintained through the winter were slaughtered, providing the peasants with a rare bounty of meat, which they would salt and smoke to ensure it lasted throughout the season. Their drink was usually ale or beer, made from barley and often brewed at home. Water was not always safe to drink, so these weak ales provided hydration as well as calories. In some regions, they also had access to cider or mead. Milk was also drunk and was used to make cheese and butter, but it did not keep well, so it was often turned into these longer-lasting products. The cold environment and lack of sunlight during the winter months also led to a deficiency of vitamin D, which is crucial for the absorption of calcium and phosphorus in the body. This deficiency could lead to health problems like rickets in children and osteomalacia in adults, conditions that weaken the bones. However, the consumption of fish, particularly oily fish like herring, which was often smoked or salted for preservation, provided them with some vitamin D. Despite these hardships, the medieval peasants found ways to survive and even find joy in the cold winter months. Winter was a time for storytelling and music. They would gather around the hearth, sharing tales, singing songs, and playing simple instruments. These were precious moments of warmth and light in the dark, cold winter, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, echoing down the ages to us. These were the people who, despite their hardships, laid the foundations of the world we live in today. As we drift off into sleep, we carry with us a sense of gratitude for their struggles and their strength. As we delve further into the lives of the medieval peasantry during the coldest winter months, it becomes evident that survival was not merely a result of happenstance. Rather, It was the fruit of meticulous planning, community cooperation, and a profound understanding of the land and its patterns. Let's now turn our attention to the ingenious methods employed by the peasantry to ensure their survival. One such method was the storage of food. It is crucial to understand that in a society devoid of modern refrigeration, the preservation and safekeeping of food was an art form in itself. The peasants harvested crops during the warmer seasons, but they knew that the yield had to last throughout the harsh, barren winter months. Thus, they devoted a significant amount of time to drying, pickling, and smoking food. This was done not just at an individual level, but was a collective effort, with the entire village participating in the process. They stored grains in airtight containers, hung meats in smokehouses, and sealed fruits in jars after pickling them. This food was carefully rationed and was supplemented by whatever meager produce the winter months had to offer. Shelter was another significant aspect of winter survival. The homes of medieval peasants were made of wattle and daub, a mixture of straw, clay, and animal dung. The thick insulating walls provided a barrier against the cold, while the thatched roofs prevented snow from entering. However, these homes were not perfect. They were often damp and cold, and the peasants would huddle around the hearth for warmth. To compensate for the lack of adequate heating, peasants used straw or reed mats on the floors and hung heavy tapestries or animal skins on the walls to preserve heat. Clothing played an equally important role in winter survival. Peasants wore layers of clothing made from fabrics like wool, linen, and hemp. These materials were readily available and could be woven into sturdy, warm garments. Cloaks and shawls were common, and footwear was typically made from leather or wood, lined with straw to provide insulation against the cold ground. In addition to these physical preparations, peasants also relied on their close-knit community for survival. In times of scarcity, neighbors would share food and resources, ensuring that no one went without. This sense of unity and solidarity was a defining characteristic of medieval peasant life, and it was particularly evident during the challenging winter months. Moreover, the peasants understood the importance of maintaining their health during these strenuous times. They made use of herbal remedies and folklore medicine to treat common ailments. Knowledge of these remedies was passed down through generations and was an integral part of their survival strategy. Equally important was their spiritual faith. The harsh winters were often seen as a test of their faith, and the peasants would turn to prayer for comfort and guidance. The local church was a refuge, a place of warmth and community where they could find solace amidst the hardship. As we delve deeper into the medieval winter, we begin to see the resilience and adaptability of the peasants. Despite the harsh conditions, they found ways to endure and even thrive. Their survival was a testament to their resourcefulness, their understanding of the natural world, and their ability to work together as a community. As you drift further into sleep, let the stories of these resilient individuals lull you into a peaceful slumber. Imagine the warmth of the hearth, the comfort of the community, and the satisfaction of a well-stored pantry. As we continue our journey, let the tales of the medieval peasantry warm your dreams, just as their strategies warmed their homes during the coldest winters. In the heart of winter, the medieval peasant's life was dictated by the sun. As the daylight hours dwindled, so too did the workday. Their routine changed from the labor-intensive tasks of the warmer months to those that could be performed indoors or required less daylight. And yet, the cold winter days were not entirely devoid of work for the diligent peasant. There was always something that needed tending to, whether it was the family's livestock, the preparation of food, or even the simple act of keeping the home warm. The fireplaces in most peasant homes were not equipped with chimneys, allowing the smoke to fill the living space before escaping through small openings in the roof. The smoke helped to deter insects and made the thatch less flammable, but it also made the indoor air quality rather poor during the winter months. Consequently, maintaining a constant fire was a delicate balance. The fire would need to be large enough to provide warmth, but not so large as to suffocate the occupants with smoke. This was a skill that was learned early in life and perfected over time. Firewood, a crucial commodity during the winter, was collected throughout the year. The right to gather firewood was often included in the peasant's tenancy agreement with the local lord. Knowing how much wood to gather, how to store it properly, and how to burn it most efficiently was a matter of survival. The best firewood was dry, seasoned hardwood like oak, which burned slowly and gave off substantial heat. Peasants would spend many an autumn day gathering and chopping wood, preparing for the long winter ahead. Keeping warm wasn't the only challenge the medieval peasants faced during winter. Food preservation was another important and often tricky task. In the months leading up to winter, peasants would have harvested their crops and slaughtered most of their livestock, keeping only breeding pairs. The meat was then preserved, usually by smoking or salting, to ensure it would last the winter. Vegetables, grains, and fruits were also preserved in various ways. Grains were dried and stored to make bread throughout the winter. Vegetables like onions, garlic, and carrots were often stored in a Hessian sack in a cool, dry place. Fruits were turned into preserves, and herbs were dried and stored for medicinal use. The importance of these food storage techniques cannot be overstated. During the harshest months of winter, a family's survival could depend on what they had successfully managed to store away during the harvest season. It was not uncommon for food supplies to run dangerously low towards the end of winter, and peasants had to be creative to make their resources last. Indeed, the winter period was a time of careful resource management for the medieval peasant. But it also offered a break from the relentless pace of work required in the warmer months. With less daylight and fewer tasks to be done, winter was a time for rest and recuperation. It was a time for families to come together, to tell stories, and to pass on the skills and knowledge that were crucial for survival. This period of relative calm was also a time for spirituality. The peasant calendar was marked by numerous religious holidays, many of which fell during the winter months. These holidays offered a welcome respite from the daily grind, and were often the only times when peasants could enjoy a modicum of leisure. Despite the hardships, winter was not just a time of survival for the medieval peasant. It was a time to rest, to connect with family, and to prepare for the coming year. The resilience, resourcefulness, and sheer determination of these individuals laid the foundations for the societies we live in today. Their survival strategies, honed over centuries, provide us a glimpse into a time that was harsh, yet filled with a determination and hope that spring would soon return. During the bitterly cold winters of the Middle Ages, the survival of the peasants was indeed a challenge that was met with resilience and ingenuity. They had to find ways to keep warm, feed themselves and their livestock, and maintain their homes and tools in a time when modern conveniences were not yet available. The primary source of warmth during the medieval era was fire. Fireplaces were common in the homes of the peasants. They were not the grand, ornate hearths that you might see in the homes of the nobility, but rather simple structures constructed of stone or clay. Wood was the main fuel for these fires, but it was not always readily available, especially during the harshest of winters. As a result, peasants often used other things to fuel their fires. This included dried animal dung, peat, and even straw, which were all resources readily available on their farms. As the fire roared and crackled, it not only provided warmth, but also a means of cooking food. In the medieval times, the diet of the peasants was simple and hearty. During the winter, they relied heavily on preserved foods. This included dried meats, pickled vegetables, and fermented foods like sauerkraut. These foods were all stored in root cellars, which were dug deep into the ground to take advantage of the earth's natural insulation. The peasants would also have a supply of grains, like barley and rye, which they could use to make bread or porridge. Animals were a vital part of the peasants' survival during the winter. Livestock provided not only food, but also other resources. Sheep, for instance, offered wool for making warm clothing and blankets. The peasants would shear the sheep before winter, spinning the wool into yarn and then weaving it into cloth. Chickens provided eggs, an excellent source of nutrition during the lean winter months, and cows provided milk, which could be made into cheese and butter. Maintenance of homes and tools was another critical aspect of survival. Peasants' homes were typically made from wattle and daub, a combination of woven branches and clay. Over time, the weather would cause the clay to crack and fall away, leaving gaps that would allow the cold winter wind to seep in. Therefore, before winter set in, the peasants would perform necessary repairs to ensure their homes were as insulated as possible. They would patch up any holes with fresh daub and even add an extra layer of straw to the roof for added insulation. Tools, too, needed to be in good working order, so sharpening blades, repairing handles, and oiling hinges were all common tasks as winter approached. Peasants also had to prepare for the lack of daylight during the winter months. They made candles from tallow, which is animal fat, to provide light. The process of making tallow candles was labor-intensive, involving rendering the fat, soaking the wicks in the liquid tallow, and then allowing them to harden. But the payoff was the ability to extend their productive hours into the evening, which was particularly useful during the short winter days. The harsh reality of the medieval winters often brought communities together. Neighbors would help each other with preparations and share resources. They would gather around the fire in the evenings, sharing stories and songs, and finding comfort in each other's company. This sense of community was a vital part of their survival strategy. In conclusion, the survival of the medieval peasants during the coldest winter was a testament to their resilience and resourcefulness. They made the best use of what they had, worked together as a community, and found ways to thrive in the face of adversity. It is a fascinating glimpse into a time when survival was not taken for granted, but rather was a hard-earned achievement. As we glide through the icy timeline of medieval winters, we now find ourselves situated in the heart of a particularly harsh, cold season. Our subject of focus, the medieval peasants, had already expended considerable energy, ensuring that their homes were well prepared for the encroaching chill. Their homes, generally composed of wattle and daub, were reinforced with thatching for insulation. The hearth would typically enjoy a steady supply of firewood, providing a valuable source of warmth for the entire household. Yet, as we delve deeper into the realities of this period, we discover that the severity of the winter season was not merely a matter of cold temperatures. The winter also brought with it a scarcity of resources, making survival a struggle for many. The scarcity of food during the winter months was a significant challenge for the medieval peasants. Their diet during this season was largely limited to preserved food, primarily salted meat and pickled vegetables. They'd spent the warmer months cultivating their crops and raising their livestock, using the autumn season to harvest and preserve as much of these resources as possible. They'd store these provisions in a cellar, cool and dark, where the food could endure the long winter months. The peasants also depended on hunting and foraging for sustenance, although these activities became increasingly difficult as the cold weather set in. In addition to the lack of food, the winter months also presented a challenge in terms of water availability. The rivers and streams would often freeze over, making it difficult for the peasants to access fresh water. They developed ingenious solutions to this problem, such as melting snow or ice over the fire to obtain drinking water. This was a labor-intensive process, but it was essential for their survival. While the peasants battled the cold, they also had to contend with a variety of health issues. The lack of sunlight during the winter months often led to vitamin D deficiency, resulting in a condition known as rickets. This disease, characterized by soft, weak bones, was prevalent among children. The peasants also faced the risk of frostbite and hypothermia, conditions that could prove fatal if left untreated. Despite these harsh conditions, the peasants found ways to persevere. They would huddle together for warmth, often sharing the same bed to conserve body heat. Clothing was layered and made from wool or fur whenever possible. They kept their feet wrapped in straw or cloth to prevent frostbite, and covered their heads with woolen caps or hoods. The villagers would also turn to their community for support during these tough times. The concept of barn raising, where the entire village would come together to construct a barn for a neighbor, is a well-known example of this community spirit. They would share resources, assist each other in hunting and foraging, and provide care for the sick and elderly. The church played a significant role in the lives of the medieval peasants, especially during the winter months. It was not just a place of worship, but also a source of physical and spiritual support. The church would often distribute food and clothing to the needy, and provide shelter for those without a home. The clergy would also offer prayers and blessings for the villagers, providing them with a sense of hope and resilience during these challenging times. The winter months were also a time for storytelling and passing down traditions. The peasants would gather around the fire, sharing tales of bravery and adventure, folklore and fables. These stories served to entertain and educate, providing a welcome distraction from the harsh reality of their surroundings. In the face of adversities and hardships, The medieval peasants demonstrated remarkable fortitude and resilience. Their survival strategies, born out of necessity and resourcefulness, offer a poignant testament to the human spirit's ability to endure and adapt. And so, as we continue to journey through the frost-laden landscape of medieval winters, we gain a deeper appreciation for the trials and triumphs of these humble individuals whose stories continue to resonate across the corridors of time. As the bitter winds of winter blew across the medieval landscape, the peasants faced another challenge in their struggle for survival. The scarcity of food during these frosty months was a grave concern, and it was during this time that their resourcefulness truly shone. The preservation techniques they had carefully employed during the abundant seasons now ensured their sustenance. The cellars and larders of their modest cottages held an array of preserved foods, salted meat, root vegetables stored in sand to prevent rotting, barrels of pickled cabbages, and hard cheeses were all common sights. Their diet may have been monotonous during these winter months, but it was enough to sustain them through the harsh weather. Grains, which were harvested during the summer and autumn, were a critical component of the medieval peasants' diet. These grains were milled into flour and used to make bread, which was a staple food item. The milling process, often carried out at the local lord's mill, was a communal task that brought the villagers together, reinforcing social bonds in the face of adversity. The peasants would also brew ale from the barley, for water was often unsafe to drink. This ale, though weak, was a crucial source of calories during the winter months. Firewood was another crucial resource during the winter. The lord of the manor typically had control over the local forests, and the peasants were often restricted in the amount of wood they could gather. This meant that they had to be economical with their fuel. They often used peat, straw, and animal dung as additional sources of fuel. These materials were not as efficient as wood, but they were abundant and cheap. The warmth provided by these humble fires was essential for survival in the bitter cold of the medieval winter. The homes of these peasants, while rudimentary, also played a role in their survival. The walls of their cottages were often made of wattle and daub, a mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung. This material had excellent insulating properties, helping to retain heat inside the home. The thatched roofs, while susceptible to fire, also provided effective insulation. The interior of these cottages was often smoky and dimly lit, with the family's livestock often sharing the living space to provide additional heat. In the face of these harsh conditions, the community spirit of the medieval village was of paramount importance. Villagers relied heavily on each other for survival, sharing resources, labor, and knowledge. The bonds of kinship and neighborliness were reinforced during these challenging times, creating a sense of solidarity and mutual support. The church also played a vital role in the lives of the peasants during the winter months. The promise of spiritual salvation provided comfort in the face of physical hardship. The church was often the only building in the village that was heated, providing a warm sanctuary where villagers could gather for worship and social interaction. The clergy also provided charity to those in need, distributing alms to the poorest villagers. As the winter wore on, the peasants would engage in a variety of indoor activities to pass the time. They would mend tools, weave cloth, and repair their homes. Children would play simple games, while the adults would tell stories and sing songs. These activities not only kept them busy, but also helped to preserve their cultural heritage and oral traditions. Despite the harshness of the medieval winter, the peasants were not passive victims of their circumstances. They were resourceful, resilient, and adaptable. They developed strategies to ensure their survival, relying on their knowledge of the natural world and their ability to work together as a community. While life was certainly not easy for the medieval peasant during the winter months, their ingenuity and perseverance allowed them to endure. As we continue our journey through the medieval peasants' survival of the coldest winter, we can begin to appreciate the strength and tenacity of these individuals. So, as you close your eyes and drift into slumber, imagine the warmth of the fire in a humble peasant's cottage, the comforting taste of a simple meal, and the close-knit community that helped them survive. In the depths of a harsh medieval winter, one of the most critical survival strategies for the peasant class was the preservation and efficient utilization of their resources. The way they conserved, shared, and utilized what little they had was a testament to their resilience and resourcefulness. This was a time when waste was not an option. It was a time of survival, of making do with less, and finding creative ways to stretch what little they had. Let's imagine a typical peasant household during the winter months. The house was usually made of wattle and daub, a mixture of mud, clay, straw, and animal dung. It was a simple structure, with a thatched roof and a central hearth for warmth. The family lived in one room, sharing the space with their animals. This was not merely for convenience. The body heat of the animals helped to warm the living quarters, a crucial comfort in the severe cold. Their diet during these months was predominantly carbohydrates, as vegetables were scarce and meat was a luxury few could afford. The mainstay of their diet was dark, coarse bread made from rye or barley. They also ate pottage, a thick stew made from grains, vegetables, and whatever scraps of meat they could afford. They supplemented this diet with foraged nuts, berries, and wild greens. Food preservation was a vital skill in these times. The peasants knew how to salt, smoke, and dry meat for long-term storage. Vegetables such as cabbages and turnips were stored in pits dug into the ground, where the earth's natural insulation kept them fresh. Fruits were often dried or preserved in honey. Milk was turned into cheese and butter, which could be stored for longer periods. Firewood was another precious resource. Each family would collect and store firewood during the warmer months, knowing they would rely on it for heating and cooking during the winter. They would also use dried animal dung as fuel. Every scrap of wood, every piece of dung, was collected and used with care. Clothing was also a critical factor in the survival of the peasant class during the winter. Their clothes were generally made of wool, which provided good insulation against the cold. They would layer their clothing, wearing multiple tunics and cloaks. Shoes were typically made of leather, and in the coldest months they would stuff straw or hay into their shoes for added insulation. The winter months were also a time for communal activities. The peasants would gather in the local tavern or in each other's homes, sharing stories, songs, and whatever food and drink they had. These gatherings were not just for entertainment. They were a means of mutual support and communal survival. During this time, the church also played a significant role in the lives of the peasants. The church was a source of spiritual comfort and practical assistance. It provided food and shelter for the poor, and its feast days offered a welcome break from the hardship of daily life. As the winter wore on, the peasants would look forward to the coming of spring, when the earth would thaw and they could begin planting their crops again. It was a cycle of survival and renewal, a testament to the resilience and resourcefulness of the medieval peasant. In this way, the medieval peasants survived the coldest winter. Their lives were not easy, and their survival techniques were not sophisticated by modern standards, but they were effective. They were a people who knew how to make the most of what they had, to endure and to survive. As we drift off to sleep, we can take a moment to appreciate the strength and resilience of these medieval peasants, whose lives were a constant struggle, but who nevertheless found ways to endure and to thrive. As we delve deeper into the winter months of the medieval period, we find ourselves amidst the harsh reality of the cold, in the heart of February, the coldest month of the year. This was a time when the world seemed to be in perpetual twilight, the sun barely visible above the horizon, its weak rays doing little to thaw the frozen earth. The ground was a solid mass of ice, the rivers and streams frozen solid, the trees bare and skeletal against the grey sky. Peasants spent the majority of their time indoors, seeking refuge from the biting cold in their humble abodes. Their homes, though small and simple, were their haven against the merciless elements. Constructed from wattle and daub, with a thatched roof overhead, these structures were designed to retain heat. A central hearth provided warmth and a place to cook meals, while the smoke wafted up and out through a hole in the roof. Families huddled together for warmth, sharing body heat as they slept in close proximity on straw mattresses. Even the animals, hardy as they were brought indoors in severe weather, sharing the living space with the humans. This was not just out of kindness, but also a practical measure. The animals' body heat contributed to the warmth of the home, and their presence ensured they would survive the winter and be able to work come spring. Fuel for the fire was a precious commodity. Most of the wood had been gathered during the warmer months and stored for winter use. However, as the winter wore on, supplies dwindled. Peasants had to be judicious in their use of wood, burning it only when necessary. They also supplemented their supply with other materials like peat, dried dung, and straw. The diet of the peasants during these winter months was meagre and monotonous. Most of their food came from stores of grain, dried fruits, and salted meat that had been prepared during the harvest. Sometimes they were supplemented with whatever could be scavenged from the frozen landscape: nuts, berries, and the occasional game caught in snares. Life was not entirely bleak, however. Winter was also a time for certain indoor activities and chores. Women would spin thread and weave cloth, a task that required a steady hand and patience. Men would repair tools and equipment, preparing for the planting season ahead. Children would play simple games, their laughter a welcome relief from the otherwise grim atmosphere. Religion played a significant role in the life of a medieval peasant, and even more so during the harsh winter months. The church provided solace and hope, promising the return of warmth and abundance. Festivals like Candlemas, celebrated on February 2nd, brought a semblance of joy and respite. It marked the midpoint of winter, halfway between the shortest day and the spring equinox, a reminder that despite the bitter cold, spring was not far away. Despite the hardships, peasants showed an admirable resilience. They understood the cyclical nature of the seasons and knew that with the arrival of spring, life would once again blossom. The harsh winter months were a test of their endurance and adaptability, a testament to their resourcefulness and sheer will to survive. As we conclude this segment of our journey, we gain a deeper appreciation for the strength and tenacity of the medieval peasant. Their struggles and triumphs against the coldest winter teach us valuable lessons about resilience, resourcefulness, and the indomitable human spirit. As you drift off into sleep, let these thoughts guide your dreams, painting images of a world long past, yet resonant with echoes of our own. In the depth of the medieval winter, the peasants faced harsh realities that were far removed from the romanticized images of snow-covered castles and jousting knights. Life for a peasant during the coldest months was a grueling test of endurance and survival. Yet, despite the hardship, they managed to carve out a semblance of existence, relying on a combination of resourcefulness, community support, and a profound connection to the natural world. The first line of defense against winter's chill for the medieval peasant was their home, typically a one-room structure made from timber and wattle and daub, a mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung. The roofs were thatched with reed or straw. While these materials may seem primitive by modern standards, they provided effective insulation against the cold. The homes were often small, which limited the interior space that needed to be heated. A central hearth provided warmth and a place to cook meals. The family, along with their livestock, would huddle around this hearth, sharing body heat and the warmth from the fire. The food that would sustain them through the winter months was harvested in the autumn, stored and carefully rationed. Cabbage, turnips, and other root vegetables were staples of the winter diet, stored in pits or cellars where the cool, stable temperatures kept them from spoiling. Grains were milled into flour and baked into bread, providing much-needed carbohydrates. Meat was a rare luxury, but when available, it was preserved through salting or smoking. Peasants also foraged for nuts and berries, adding variety and essential nutrients to their diet. Yet food was not the only concern. Water sources often froze in the winter, making it difficult to access drinking water. To combat this, peasants would store water in barrels or jugs, keeping it within their homes where it was less likely to freeze. They also harvested ice from ponds and lakes, storing it in ice houses for use in warmer months. Clothing was another essential component of winter survival. Most peasants could not afford the furs and wools worn by the nobility, so they relied on simpler materials. Woolen tunics and leggings were common, providing much-needed warmth. Thick cloaks, often lined with sheepskin, were used for additional insulation. Footwear was typically made from leather or wooden clogs, stuffed with straw to keep the feet warm. Despite these hardships, there were moments of joy and communal spirit. Winter was a time for storytelling, music, and games. Families and neighbors would gather around the hearth, sharing stories and songs that had been passed down through generations. These traditions helped to stave off the darkness and cold, fostering a sense of community and shared experience. The church also played a significant role in the life of the medieval peasant during winter. Religious holidays, like Christmas and Epiphany, were marked with special services and feasts. These occasions offered a respite from the daily struggles of winter survival, providing an opportunity for celebration and communal bonding. Winter survival was a communal effort, requiring the collective resources and labor of the entire village. Everyone had a role to play, from the youngest child gathering firewood to the eldest grandmother preparing meals. This sense of collective responsibility and mutual aid was crucial to their survival. The harshness of winter brought its own beauty, the stark, snow-covered landscapes, the crystal-clear winter nights. It was this profound connection to the natural world, this understanding of the rhythms and cycles of life, that grounded the medieval peasant and gave them the strength to endure. Despite the hardships, they found a way to survive, to adapt, and ultimately, to thrive. The tale of the medieval peasant's winter survival is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder of our collective strength and adaptability. It is a story of survival against the odds, of community and shared experience, and of the profound connection between humans and the natural world. It is a story that continues to resonate, reminding us of our own capacity to endure and thrive, even in the harshest of circumstances. As winter approached, medieval peasants would turn their attention to the storage and preservation of food. It was a crucial task, as their survival during the harsh winter months depended on it. In the autumn, they would harvest their summer crops, such as barley, oats, and peas. The grains would be threshed and winnowed, a process that separated the wheat from the chaff. The grain was then stored in large wooden barrels or in the peasant's granary to be used throughout the winter. It was crucial to keep the grain dry and safe from pests, as a spoiled harvest could lead to famine. The peasantry also preserved vegetables, such as onions, garlic, and cabbages, by drying or preserving them in salt. Root vegetables like turnips and carrots were often stored in the ground throughout the winter, insulated by a layer of straw to prevent them from freezing. Apples, pears, and other fruits were gathered and made into preserves or hard cider, a popular drink among the peasants. Livestock played an essential role in a peasant's survival during winter. In the autumn, animals were evaluated, and decisions were made about which would be slaughtered and which would be kept alive for breeding. Ideally, a peasant would keep enough animals alive to maintain their herd or flock, but not so many that they would deplete their winter stores. The animals that were slaughtered would be used for meat, and every part of the animal was used to ensure nothing went to waste. The meat would be smoked, salted, or dried to preserve it. Medieval peasants also relied heavily on fish for sustenance. Rivers, ponds, and the sea provided an abundant source of food. The fish were salted or smoked to last through the winter. Inland communities without access to the sea could still rely on freshwater fish from rivers or man-made ponds. Hunting and gathering also supplemented their diet. Men and boys would hunt for game, while women and girls gathered nuts, berries, and edible plants. Hunting was not only a source of food, but also provided valuable materials like fur and leather. However, hunting rights were often controlled by local nobles, and peasants could be punished for poaching. The peasants' homes were built to withstand the harsh winter weather. They were typically made from a mixture of wood, wattle, and daub, with thatched roofs. The walls were thick and insulated with straw or animal skins to keep the cold out and the heat in. Inside, a fire would be kept burning throughout the winter. The smoke from the fire would escape through a hole in the roof, also serving to deter insects and vermin. Despite their best efforts, winter was a challenging time for medieval peasants. Food could run low, and the cold could be severe. Illness was common, and many did not survive. However, they were resourceful and resilient, finding ways to adapt and survive in a harsh and unforgiving environment. Winter was also a time for community. The long, cold nights were often spent huddled around the fire, sharing stories, songs, and games. It was a time for rest and recuperation after the hard work of the summer and autumn. Despite the hardships, there was a sense of camaraderie and shared experience that bound the community together. It's important to remember that while these were challenging times, they were also times of innovation and adaptation. The methods the peasants used to survive the winter months were refined over centuries, passed down from generation to generation. Their resilience and resourcefulness are testaments to human ingenuity and determination. In many ways, the strategies they employed are still relevant today, reminding us of our roots and our enduring connection to the natural world. As the snow began to cover the land, the peasants' daily routine in the medieval era underwent a significant shift. The agricultural fields, once teeming with crops, were now barren and covered in a thick blanket of snow. Yet, even amidst this stark and harsh landscape, life persisted. It was a testament to the resilience and resourcefulness of these humble folk, who, with their limited means, managed to find ways to survive the harshest winters. Let's talk about food first. During the long winter months, when farming was nearly impossible, the peasants had to rely on the food they had stored from the previous harvest. The preservation of food was, therefore, a critical task that needed to be performed with utmost care and precision. Peasants would preserve fruits and vegetables by pickling them in vinegar or fermenting them. They would also smoke or salt meats to extend their shelf life. The process of smoking meat involved exposing it to smoke from burning wood, which not only preserved the meat, but also enhanced its flavour. Cabbage was a particularly crucial vegetable during these times. It was easy to grow, could be harvested late into the season, and when fermented into sauerkraut, could be stored for a long time. Sauerkraut also had the added benefit of being high in vitamin C, a nutrient that was otherwise hard to come by during the winter months, helping the peasants stave off scurvy. Beyond food, the peasants had to think about warmth. Their homes, often made of wattle and daub, were not particularly well insulated. To keep the cold out, they would hang heavy fabrics or animal hides on the walls and over the windows. The hearth was the heart of the home during winter, providing both heat and a place to cook. Firewood needed to be collected and stored in large quantities before the onset of winter, as once the snow set in, gathering more would be nearly impossible. In these homes, families huddled together for warmth. The idea of personal space was not a luxury they could afford in the chill of winter. They shared not only their living space, but also their sleeping quarters. The close quarters, while not ideal, provided much needed body warmth during the freezing nights. Clothing was another crucial aspect of winter survival. Peasants would layer their clothing to trap the body's heat. They would wear woolen garments, as wool has excellent insulating properties. Animal pelts were also used to make warm cloaks and mittens. During the day, when they were not occupied with tasks related to survival, the peasants found solace in their faith. The church played a significant role in the lives of medieval peasants, and winter was no exception. The church calendar was filled with feasts and holy days that broke up the monotony of the winter months. These occasions were not only religious observances, but also opportunities for social interaction and communal support. In the absence of modern amenities, the medieval peasants' survival during the coldest winter was a testament to human resilience and resourcefulness. It was a challenging time, but they found ways to endure and adapt, drawing on their knowledge of the land, their skills in food preservation, and their faith in God. The medieval peasants' experience during winter offers us a unique perspective into their daily lives. Their survival strategies, ingenious and effective, are a testament to the human spirit's adaptability and resilience. And in their story, we find a profound appreciation for the comforts of our modern lives. So, as we drift off to sleep tonight, let's hold a moment of gratitude for our warm homes, plentiful food, and the ease with which we navigate the challenges of winter. In the heart of the medieval winter, the daily life of the peasants took on a very different rhythm. The cold was not just a discomfort, but a very real threat to survival, and every aspect of their lives would have been impacted by the weather. The landscape was often blanketed with snow, and the bitter cold would have penetrated even the thickest walls of their humble dwellings. With the fields lying dormant, there was little agricultural work to be done, and the peasants had to find other ways to occupy their time and keep warm. One way they did this was by gathering around the hearth, the centerpiece of the peasant home. This was where they cooked their meals, warmed themselves, and told stories to pass the time. The hearth was more than just a source of heat. It was a sacred place where the family would gather to share meals, talk, and bond. In the winter, the fire would have been kept burning almost constantly, providing a small but vital source of warmth and light in the long, dark nights. In addition to keeping warm, the peasants also had to find ways to feed themselves during the winter months. The harvest would have been long over by the time winter arrived, and so they would have had to rely on their stores of grain and other foodstuffs. They would have made heavy use of pickling, drying and smoking to preserve food for the winter, and their diet was often supplemented with wild game and fish. The saying, "make hay while the sun shines," was a literal guideline for these people. They worked hard during the warmer months to ensure they had enough to eat when the cold set in. Craftsmanship also played a crucial role in the lives of the peasants during the winter months. With the agricultural work at a standstill, they would have had more time to devote to their crafts. This was the time when they would repair tools, mend clothes, and make new ones. These skills were absolutely vital for their survival. Far from being idle, the peasants would have been very busy during the winter months, always ensuring that they were prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. The church was another important factor in the lives of the peasants during the winter. Religious festivals and holy days provided a much-needed break from the monotony of daily life, and they were often the highlight of the winter season. The celebration of Christmas, in particular, was a time of joy and festivity. Despite the harshness of their lives, the peasants knew how to enjoy themselves, and they would have celebrated these occasions with music, dancing, and feasting. The winter was also a time for reflection and planning for the future. The peasants would have taken stock of their resources, assessed what they had, and planned for the coming year. They would have made decisions about what to plant, how much to set aside for taxes and rents, and how to improve their lot in life. Despite the hardships they faced, the peasants were not passive victims of their circumstances. They were active participants in their own survival, constantly thinking and planning for the future. The harshness of the winter was also a time for community. The peasants would have depended on each other for support and help in times of need. If someone was sick or in need of help, the community would have rallied around them. The bonds that were formed during these difficult times were often strong and lasting, and they were a crucial part of the peasants' survival strategy. Despite the many challenges they faced, the peasants were remarkably resilient. They had to be. Survival was a constant struggle, and the winter was the hardest time of all. But through a combination of resourcefulness, hard work, and community support, they managed to endure. Year after year, the life of a medieval peasant was far from easy, but they were survivors, and their story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Finally, as spring approached, the peasants would have felt a sense of relief. The worst of the winter was over, and they could look forward to the warmer months ahead. The return of the sun would have been a cause for celebration, a sign that they had made it through another winter, and a reminder of the cycle of life and the promise of renewal. As we journey through the hard winter of history, we too can find solace in the resilience and tenacity of these medieval peasants, and perhaps draw some inspiration from their story. As we delve deeper into the frigid winters of the Middle Ages, we continue our exploration of the lives of the everyday peasants and how they managed to survive against the odds. We have already discussed the importance of communal living, the preservation of food, and the reliance on livestock. In this section, we will explore the role of clothing, religion, and the careful use of fuel in the struggle to survive the winter months. Clothing, much like food, was prepared in advance and stored for the colder months. The primary materials used for clothing were wool, linen, and leather. Wool, in particular, was highly prized due to its warmth and durability. The wool was spun into yarn and then woven into cloth. This was a time-consuming process, often carried out by women and children. Clothing was layered, with several garments worn on top of each other to trap heat. Cloaks were worn over tunics and leggings, often with a hood to protect against wind and snow. Footwear was typically made of leather and was stuffed with straw or dried grass to provide additional insulation. Religion played a significant role in the lives of medieval peasants. The church was not only a place of worship, but also a place of community and refuge. During the coldest months of the year, the church would often serve as a gathering place where villagers could find warmth and comfort. The church also provided spiritual support, offering prayers and blessings for the safety and well-being of the villagers. The belief in divine protection, despite the harsh conditions, gave the villagers a sense of hope and resilience. Fuel was a precious commodity during the winter months. Firewood was collected throughout the year and carefully rationed. The wood was primarily used for cooking and heating, with small fires kept burning throughout the day and night. Peat, a type of fuel made from decaying vegetation, was also used in some regions. This was dug from the ground, dried, and stored for use during the winter. The use of fuel was carefully managed, with efforts made to conserve as much as possible. The medieval peasants' survival during the coldest winters was a testament to their resourcefulness and resilience. They adapted to their environment, utilizing the resources at their disposal and relying on communal support and faith to endure the harsh conditions. As we continue our journey into the world of the medieval peasant, we will explore more of their survival strategies, including the use of herbal medicine, the role of storytelling, and the importance of rest and sleep. So, as we allow the soothing tales of these resourceful peasants to lull us into a restful slumber, we are reminded of the strength of the human spirit, the power of community, and the enduring will to survive. We will delve further into their world in our next section, but for now, let their stories guide you into a peaceful sleep, much like the peasants huddled around their fires, listening to the soft crackle of the wood and the whispered tales of their ancestors. In the heart of the Middle Ages, the winter season held a stark duality for the rural peasantry. On one hand, it was a time of relative rest, as the fields lay dormant under their frosty blanket. The frantic labor of planting and harvesting was temporarily stilled, giving way to shorter, slower days, within the relative warmth and safety of the homestead. On the other hand, winter was a time of great hardship, a test of endurance against the frigid elements and dwindling food stores. Let's delve deeper into how the medieval peasants weathered these challenging months. One cannot talk about the winter season without first mentioning the crucial role of the harvest. The bountiful fall harvest would provide the majority of food needed to sustain a family through the winter months. Grains such as barley, oats, and rye were harvested and stored in granaries, while vegetables like turnips, onions, and cabbages were stored in root cellars. Fruits were dried or made into preserves, and nuts were gathered and stored for long-term use. Preservation techniques were of utmost importance during this time. Without refrigeration, medieval peasantry relied heavily on drying, fermenting, salting, and smoking to keep their food from spoiling. Fish and meat were often salted or smoked over a fire to preserve them for the long winter months. This process not only extended the shelf life of these foods, but also added a distinctive flavor that was much appreciated during the drab winter months. The livestock also required careful management during the winter. Most of the herd would be slaughtered, as it was too expensive to keep a large number of animals fed and sheltered throughout the winter. Only the strongest and most productive animals, such as the breeding stock and the milk cows, were kept alive. The slaughtered animals provided a fresh supply of meat initially, with the remainder preserved for later use. Winter was also a time of indoor activities for the medieval peasants. These included mending tools, repairing homes, making clothes, and crafting necessary items for daily life. The short daylight hours were filled with tasks that could be done by the light of the fire or with the aid of candles. Even children were expected to contribute, with tasks appropriate to their age and ability. In terms of warmth, the peasants relied heavily on their hearths. The hearth served not only as a source of heat, but also a place for cooking and a focal point for family and community gatherings. Fuel for the fire was primarily wood, but peat and dried animal dung were also used in areas where wood was scarce. Firewood was a precious commodity and needed to be carefully rationed to ensure it lasted the winter. Despite the harsh conditions, winter was also a time of celebration for the rural peasantry. The calendar was punctuated by various religious and secular festivities, which provided a welcome distraction from the hardships of the season. Christmas was a particularly important celebration, with feasting, drinking, and merriment lasting up to 12 days. But winter was not all work and no play for the medieval peasant. Leisure activities, albeit few and far between, were still part of daily life. Storytelling was a popular pastime, as was singing and playing music. Games of skill and chance were enjoyed by both adults and children, and outdoor activities like skating and snowball fights provided entertainment when the weather permitted. In summary, the medieval peasant's survival through the coldest winter was a testament to human resilience and resourcefulness. It required careful planning, diligent work, and perhaps a touch of luck. The winter season, with all its hardship, was also a time for rest, reflection, and communal solidarity. It was a time of survival, but also of celebration and joy, as the people looked forward to the coming of spring and the promise of a new growing season. In the 7th section of our deep exploration into the lives of medieval peasants during the coldest winter, we delve into the realm of clothing and how it played a significant role in their survival. Fabric was a precious commodity in medieval times, especially during the harsh winters, and the peasants went to great lengths to ensure they had adequate clothing to protect themselves from the biting cold. Most peasants could not afford to purchase new clothing or fabric. Instead, they relied on hand-me-downs, clothing swaps, or homespun fabrics. Wool was the most popular material for clothing due to its warmth and durability. It was often spun at home by the women of the household, an activity that took up a considerable amount of their time, but was necessary for their survival. The wool would be spun into yarn and then woven into rough, thick fabric. The fabric would then be skillfully cut and sewn into tunics, cloaks, hoods, and leggings. Clothing was usually loose-fitting to allow for layers to be worn underneath, providing additional warmth. Footwear was another critical aspect of winter clothing. In the harshest winters, frostbite was a real danger, especially for the peasants who had to venture out into the cold for work. Shoes were often made from leather, which was sometimes treated with animal fats to make it more waterproof. In exceptionally cold conditions, peasants might stuff straw or hay into their shoes for added insulation. In some cases, wooden pattens were worn over the shoes to lift the wearer off the cold, wet ground. Gloves and mittens were also common winter apparel. Like shoes, they were typically made from leather, with woolen linings for added warmth. Peasants would also wrap their hands in cloths or rags for extra insulation when necessary. Hoods were preferred over hats, because they could be pulled down to cover the neck and shoulders, providing more protection against the cold. Despite these provisions, the clothing of the time was often not enough to fully protect against the bitter cold. The chroniclers of the time often wrote of the hardship of the winter, of how the cold would seep into the bones and make every movement an ordeal. But the peasants were resilient, and they found ways to adapt. They would layer their clothing, sometimes wearing 2 or 3 tunics at a time. They would huddle together for warmth, often sharing beds to conserve heat, and they would keep fires burning as much as possible, even though fuel was often scarce. The importance of clothing to a medieval peasant's survival cannot be overstated. It was not just a matter of comfort, but of life and death. The clothing they wore was the result of countless hours of labor, of careful planning, and resourcefulness. It was a testament to their resilience and ingenuity, to their determination to survive even the harshest of conditions. As we continue to explore the fascinating history of how medieval peasants survived the coldest winter, we gain a deeper understanding of their daily lives and struggles. We see not just the hardship they faced, but the strength and resourcefulness they exhibited in overcoming it. It is a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity, a testament that continues to inspire us today. So, as you drift into sleep, let your mind wander back to the medieval times, to the spinning of wool, the sewing of garments, the gathering of firewood. Picture the peasants huddled together for warmth, their breath misting in the frigid air. Feel the texture of rough woolen fabric, the heat of a crackling fire, the chill of a frosty morning. And as you immerse yourself in this vivid mental journey, may you find comfort, peace, and a deep, restful sleep. We'll continue our exploration in the next section. Good night, and sleep well. As we delve deeper into the harsh realities of a bitter medieval winter, we cannot overlook the warmth that often emanated from the hearth of the humble peasant's home. The hearth, a simple stone or brick fireplace, was the heart of a medieval peasant's home. It provided not only warmth for the inhabitants, but also a place to cook their meals. Smoke from the fire would escape through a hole in the roof, while the heat would circulate throughout the small dwelling. This circular flow of warmth became a lifeline for the peasants during the coldest winters. The peasants' diet during winter was simple but nourishing. They relied heavily on preserved foods, grains and any animals they had raised. Cabbage was a staple vegetable, often fermented into sauerkraut for preservation, providing essential vitamins during the winter months. Root vegetables such as turnips and parsnips were stored in straw-filled boxes and kept in cool, dry locations. The grain, primarily barley, rye and oats, was ground into flour and used for baking bread. Animals played a vital role in the peasants' winter survival. Pigs were commonly raised and slaughtered in the late autumn, providing meat that could be preserved for the winter months. The peasants used every part of the pig. The meat was salted or smoked, the fat was rendered for lard, and the blood was used to make black pudding. Chickens provided eggs, and cows offered milk, which could be turned into butter or cheese. The peasants also relied on the local wildlife for sustenance. Hunting was generally a privilege of the nobility, but the peasants were allowed to trap small game like rabbits and birds. Fish, too, were a valuable food source. If a peasant lived near a river or lake, they could fish through holes in the ice, preserving their catch in salt or smoke. Alongside the physical sustenance, the mental fortitude of the peasants was fortified by their deep faith. The medieval church was an integral part of every community, providing spiritual comfort and a sense of unity. Special masses and processions were held during the winter months, encouraging the faithful to endure the hardships of winter with patience and hope. Community was another key to survival. The shared experience of facing the harsh winter created a bond among the peasants. They would gather in each other's homes, sharing food, stories, and warmth. These gatherings provided an emotional respite from the daily grind in the bleak winter landscape. The peasants also found ways to entertain themselves during the long winter months. Storytelling was a popular pastime, with tales of heroism, adventure, and humor passed down through generations. Music and dance also played a significant part in their lives, with individuals playing simple instruments like flutes and drums, while others danced to the rhythm. Despite the hardships, the peasants found joy and satisfaction in their simple lives. The winter, as harsh and demanding as it was, provided them an opportunity to come together, share their resources, and support one another. The resilience and resourcefulness of these medieval peasants, their ability to survive and even thrive during the coldest winters, are a testament to the indomitable human spirit. As we wrap up this section, let the stories of these humble folk lull you into a peaceful slumber, knowing that like them, we too can endure the harshest winters and find warmth in the simplest of things. In the harshest winters, a medieval peasant's survival was often determined by the amount of food and fuel they had stored up. The autumn harvest was critical in this regard, with the success or failure of the crops directly impacting the well-being of a peasant during the following winter. If the harvest was bountiful, the peasants would have a surplus of food to last them through the cold months. If the harvest was poor, however, it could result in a period of severe famine and hardship. The primary food source for peasants during the winter months was grain. This was typically ground into flour and used to make bread or gruel. If they were fortunate, peasants might also have had access to preserved meats, vegetables, and fruits. These would have been salted or dried during the warmer months, then stored for later consumption. Dairy products such as cheese and butter were also common, as were legumes like peas and beans. Firewood was another critical resource for peasants during the winter. Not only did it provide heat, but it was also necessary for cooking and for melting snow into water. Peasants would begin gathering and chopping firewood in the late summer and early autumn, storing it in a dry place to ensure it was ready for use when the cold weather arrived. Aside from providing warmth and a means of cooking food, fire also played an important role in warding off predators. In the depths of winter, when food was scarce, wild animals could pose a serious threat to a peasant's livestock. A well-maintained fire could deter these animals and protect a peasant's valuable resources. The clothing of a peasant in the Middle Ages was another factor that contributed to their ability to survive the winter. Most peasants wore a simple tunic made of wool. They also had a cloak, which could be draped over the shoulders for extra warmth. On their feet, they wore wooden clogs or leather shoes, often stuffed with straw for insulation. But perhaps the most crucial factor in a peasant's survival was community. In the harsh reality of medieval life, cooperation and mutual aid were essential. Villagers would work together to gather and store food, chop and collect firewood, and share resources. In times of extreme hardship, such as during a particularly harsh winter or in the aftermath of a poor harvest, this communal spirit could be life-saving. In the same vein, the church also played a crucial role in a peasant's life, particularly during the winter months when food could be scarce. After Mass, peasants could often count on a small meal from the church. This became especially significant during severe winters when food stores ran low. Despite the harshness of their lives, medieval peasants demonstrated a remarkable resilience. Through careful preparation, resourcefulness, and a strong sense of community, they were able to weather the coldest winters and endure the challenges of their harsh environment. Today we can learn much from their perseverance and their ability to adapt to the difficult circumstances they faced. As we draw this section to a close, let the resilience of these medieval peasants inspire you. Their survival during those cold winters is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Let their stories serve as a reminder that no matter how bleak and challenging our circumstances might seem, we have the capacity to endure. We can draw strength from the examples of those who came before us and find comfort in the knowledge that we too can survive and even thrive in the face of adversity. As we delve into the final quarter of our journey through the harsh medieval winters, let's turn our attention to the resilient peasantry, the common folk, the backbone of the societal structure. The peasants of the Middle Ages offer an intriguing case study of survival, resilience, and human spirit. The majority of the population during these times were peasants, living in small villages scattered across the vast landscapes of Europe. They were primarily farmers, labourers, and craftsmen, performing essential functions that kept the societal wheel turning. Their survival strategies during the grim winter months were a mix of practicality, preparation, and innovation. When we consider surviving a medieval winter, the first thing that comes to mind is the need for warmth. Firewood was the primary source of heat during this time, and gathering enough to last through the winter was a significant task. Peasants would spend the months leading up to winter chopping, collecting, and storing wood. This activity was not just for the individual households, but was a community endeavour. Neighbours would assist each other, ensuring that everyone had an adequate supply. However, the issue with relying solely on firewood was the smoke. Medieval homes were not equipped with chimneys, and the smoke from the fire would fill the room, causing discomfort and potential health issues. To combat this, peasants would often only light fires when the cold was unbearable, relying on heavy clothing and blankets for warmth during the rest of the time. Clothing during this period was simple and functional. Peasants would wear multiple layers of woolen garments to keep warm. These were homemade, often spun and woven by the women of the household. In addition to this, they would also use animal skins and furs, which offered additional insulation. Footwear was made from leather or wood, and many would stuff straw into their shoes to add an extra layer of warmth. Food was another critical component of survival. The diet of a medieval peasant was not varied or rich, but it was enough to sustain them through the harsh winters. They relied heavily on preserved foods, grains, dried fruits, and salted meats. These were stored in large quantities during the harvest season and rationed throughout the winter. Bread, porridge, and stews were common winter dishes, providing necessary calories and warmth. In addition to the food they stored, peasants also relied on winter crops. These were hardy vegetables that could survive the cold temperatures, such as cabbages, turnips, and onions. They were not as nutritious or filling as the summer crops, but they provided a crucial supplement to the winter diet. The long winter nights and the short days meant that peasants spent a lot of time indoors. To keep busy, they would engage in craft work, spinning wool, weaving cloth, repairing tools. These activities not only helped pass the time, but also ensured that they were prepared for the coming spring. Finally, the role of community and cooperation in survival cannot be overstated. In a time when resources were scarce and the weather was unforgiving, the ability to work together and support each other was paramount. Peasants would share resources, assist in labour, and provide emotional support to their neighbours. This sense of community was not just a byproduct of the harsh conditions, but a crucial element in their survival strategy. As we reflect on the resilience of these medieval peasants, it's important to remember that their strategies for survival were born out of necessity and shaped by their environment. They provide a compelling picture of human adaptability and resilience, offering insights that are still relevant today. As we move forward into our exploration of medieval winters, let's keep these lessons in mind, drawing parallels and contrasts with our own winter experiences. In the cold embrace of winter, the medieval peasants' survival was heavily dependent on the fruits of their labor during the warmer months. While the ground was frozen and the fields lay fallow, the peasant had to subsist on what they had managed to glean from their harvests. The diet during this time was generally restricted to grains such as barley, oats, rye, and wheat. These grains would be ground into flour and then used to make bread, which was a staple in the medieval diet. The bread was often dense and coarse, but it provided a crucial source of nutrition during the harsh winter months. The peasants also relied on preserved foods to see them through the winter. Most households had a salting tub, where meat would be preserved using salt. The meat, usually from pigs, would be cured and then stored in a cool, dry place. This provided a source of protein during the winter when fresh meat was scarce. Alongside this, they also pickled vegetables and fruits in vinegar or fermented them. Apples, for instance, were often turned into cider, which could be stored for a long time and provided a source of liquid when water was hard to come by. Even though the fields were barren, the forests were not. Medieval peasants frequently foraged for food in the woods. Nuts, berries, and other edible plants were gathered and added to their winter food stores. Hunting was also a common practice, although it was often regulated by the lord of the manor under the forest laws. These laws restricted the hunting of certain animals to the nobility, but peasants could still hunt smaller game like rabbits and birds. Trapping and fishing were also common practices that supplemented the peasants' winter diet. Surviving the winter was not just about food. Shelter was equally important. Peasant houses, generally made of wattle and daub, were not especially designed for insulation. This meant that keeping warm during the cold winter months was a constant battle. The hearth was the heart of the medieval home, providing both heat and a place to cook food. Firewood was collected throughout the year and stored for the winter. The peasants would gather around the fire in the evenings, sharing stories and tasks such as mending clothes or tools. Warm clothing was also crucial. Wool was the most common material used for clothing, and it was spun into yarn by the women of the household. The yarn was then woven into cloth, which was used to make garments. Woolen clothes provided much-needed warmth during the coldest months, and were often layered to provide extra insulation. The hard winter months also brought with them disease. The lack of fresh food and limited sunlight meant that many peasants suffered from malnutrition and diseases related to vitamin deficiency, such as scurvy. To combat this, herbs were used for their medicinal properties. Herbs like garlic, which was believed to help with digestive issues and infections, and thyme, which was thought to aid in respiratory problems, were common in the peasants' medicine cabinet. Religion also played a significant role in the survival of the peasants. The medieval world was deeply religious, and the church provided spiritual comfort during the harsh winter months. Christmas, in particular, was a time for celebration and respite from the hardships of winter. It was a time of feasting and merriment, providing a brief period of joy during the otherwise bleak winter. Finally, the peasants' survival during winter was predicated on a sense of community. In these small, tight-knit communities, individuals relied heavily on each other for survival. The shared experience of enduring the winter bound these communities together, creating a sense of unity and camaraderie that was essential for their survival. In the darkest months of the year, when the world was blanketed in snow and the cold seemed unending, it was the fruits of their labor, the warmth of their hearth, the strength of their community, and the hope of the coming spring that sustained the medieval peasants. Even in the face of such adversity, they found ways to survive, and their resilience is a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure and overcome. This concludes the second section of our exploration into the survival strategies of medieval peasants during the coldest winter. In the next section, we will delve deeper into the specific roles that men, women, and children played during this challenging season. We will also explore the various tasks and chores that filled their days and the ways in which they prepared for the coming spring. As you drift off to sleep, Consider the resilience and resourcefulness of these medieval peasants, their lives a testament to the enduring power of human survival. In the heart of the coldest winter, the medieval peasants found themselves reliant on the fruits of their summer labor. It was during these frosty months that the stores of grains, pulses, vegetables, and meat became essential. They had harvested these in the summer and autumn months, with the knowledge that these would have to see them through the winter. The grain was particularly important, for it was used to make bread and porridge, staples of the peasant diet. Even in the harshest of times, when the cold seemed unbearable and the earth was frozen and unyielding, the peasants could find comfort in the warmth of a loaf of bread, freshly baked in their hearth. The preservation of food was an art that the peasants had perfected over time. They would salt or smoke meats to extend their shelf life, while grains were dried and stored in a cool, dry place to prevent rot. Root vegetables, like turnips and parsnips, were stored in a similar manner, often in a root cellar, dug into the ground to take advantage of the earth's natural insulation. The peasants knew that their survival rested on their ability to keep their food stores safe from pests and spoilage. In addition to their stored food, the peasants also relied on winter foraging to supplement their diet. Despite the harsh conditions, certain plants and roots could still be found in the wild. They also hunted small game, like rabbits and squirrels, which were plentiful in the forests surrounding their villages. The peasants had a profound knowledge of the natural world, and they knew how to make the most of what it offered, even in the depths of winter. For heat and light during the long winter nights, the peasants relied on firewood. Chopping and gathering wood was a constant task throughout the year, but particularly in the lead up to winter. The wood was used to fuel the hearth, which was the heart of the home in medieval times. Not only did it provide warmth, but it was also where all the cooking was done, and around which the family would gather for meals and conversation. The medieval peasant's home was simple but functional. It was typically made from wattle and daub, a mixture of mud and straw, and had a thatched roof. The walls were thick to provide insulation against the cold, and the windows were small to minimize heat loss. Inside, the floor was usually made of packed earth, covered with straw for additional insulation. A loft space in the roof served as a sleeping area, where body heat from the animals kept below would rise and keep them warm. Clothing was another essential element in the peasants' winter survival. They wore layers of wool and leather, both excellent insulators. Women would spin wool into yarn and weave it into cloth, which was then used to make tunics, cloaks, and hoods. Leather was used for shoes and belts, and fur was used for extra warmth. It's important to remember that the peasants' survival in these harsh winters didn't just depend on their resources, but also on their community. They shared the work of harvesting and preserving food, chopping and gathering wood, and tending to the animals. They came together in times of need, sharing what they had, and supporting each other. This sense of community was a crucial part of their survival strategy. While the medieval winter was undoubtedly harsh, the peasants found ways to endure it. Through their clever use of resources, their knowledge of the natural world, and their strong sense of community, they were able to survive the coldest months of the year, and in doing so, they demonstrated a resilience and resourcefulness that is truly remarkable. So as we drift off to sleep tonight, we can find comfort in the knowledge that even in the harshest of times, humans have found ways to survive and thrive. We can take inspiration from the medieval peasants and remember that with resourcefulness, determination, and a little help from our community, we can weather any storm. Good night and sleep well. As the bone-chilling cold continued to seep into the homes of the medieval peasants, a sense of dread and despair loomed over their heads. The winter was harsh, long, and relentless, making survival a constant struggle. However, the indomitable spirit of these hard-working individuals never wavered. They knew that the key to survival lay in their unity, resourcefulness, and persistence. The primary source of warmth during these cold winter months was firewood. The gathering of firewood was a communal activity, with each member of the community playing a role. Elderly individuals who could not participate in the labor-intensive task of chopping wood were responsible for collecting smaller branches and twigs from the ground. The children, despite their young age, bore their share of the burden, helping in whatever way they could. The firewood was then stored in communal barns, ensuring everyone had access to this precious resource. However, firewood was not the only source of warmth. peasants also relied heavily on their livestock for heat. Animals were often kept in the lower level of the peasants' homes, their body heat contributing to the warmth of the dwelling. This dual-purpose arrangement not only ensured the animals were protected from the harsh winter conditions, but also provided the peasants with a much-needed source of warmth. The medieval peasants' diet also played a significant role in their survival. During the winter months, the diet was typically heavy in grains and legumes, providing the necessary energy to endure the cold. A common meal would be a thick, hearty stew made from dried peas, or beans, onions, and whatever vegetables were available. This would be accompanied by dark, coarse bread made from rye or barley. In addition to their physical preparations, the peasants also sought solace and strength in their faith. The church played a central role in the community, providing spiritual guidance and comfort during these challenging times. They believed that their survival was in the hands of God, and their faith gave them the strength to endure the harsh conditions. Despite the challenging circumstances, the sense of community among the peasants remained strong. They relied on each other for support, sharing resources and working together to ensure their survival. The harsh winter months served to reinforce their sense of community, as they recognized that their survival depended on their mutual cooperation. As the winter months wore on, the peasants' daily routines took on a slower pace. The fields lay dormant, covered in a thick blanket of snow. The once bustling markets were now quiet, with only the occasional trader braving the cold to sell their goods. The peasants spent most of their time indoors, huddled around the fire, mending tools, weaving cloth, and sharing stories to pass the time. Despite the hardship, the peasants found joy in simple pleasures. They would gather around the fire, singing songs, telling stories, and playing games. These moments of shared camaraderie and laughter provided a much-needed respite from the harsh reality of their situation. As the medieval peasants weathered the coldest winter, their resilience and resourcefulness were truly tested. Yet they emerged stronger, their sense of community reinforced, and their spirit unbroken. The harsh winter served as a stark reminder of their vulnerability, but it also highlighted their strength and resilience. Their survival was a testament to their tenacity and their unwavering will to endure, no matter the circumstances. Throughout the long, harsh winters of the medieval period, it was the resourcefulness of the ordinary peasant that proved crucial for survival. The primary source of heat in the peasant's home was a central hearth, where a fire would be kept burning throughout the day and night. This hearth was not just a source of warmth, but also the hub of the home, where meals were cooked, family gatherings were held, and stories were told to pass the time. The firewood needed for the hearth was collected throughout the year, with each family member participating in this task. Even the children, too small for field work, would be entrusted with gathering kindling. Wood was not the only fuel source, however. Peat, a type of decayed vegetation, was also used, especially in regions where trees were scarce. It burned slower and longer than wood, providing a steady source of warmth in the coldest months. A peasant's diet also played a key role in surviving the winter months. Though fresh fruits and vegetables were scarce, peasants relied on preserved foods. Autumn was a time of preparation, where surplus crops were pickled, dried, or stored in root cellars. Meat was also preserved through smoking or salting and stored for the winter. The medieval peasant's diet was not varied during this time, mainly consisting of dark bread made from rye or barley, onions, garlic, and preserved meats. Yet, it provided the necessary calories to sustain them through the cold. Understandably, winter was a time of less physical activity and more rest. The lack of sunlight and harsh weather conditions made it difficult for peasants to work the fields. Instead, they turned to indoor tasks, such as mending tools, weaving, and spinning. This was also a time for communal activities, like storytelling and singing, which helped to keep spirits high and forge stronger community bonds. Despite the hardships, winter also brought certain advantages. With the ground frozen solid, it was easier to transport heavy loads using sledges rather than wagons, which could get stuck in the mud during other seasons. This made it possible to bring in supplies from further afield, such as timber from the forests or stone for building. Another key aspect of survival was clothing. Peasants wore multiple layers to protect themselves from the cold. Undergarments were typically made of linen, while the outer layer was of wool. Fur was also used, especially for cloaks and gloves. Shoes were often made of leather or wood and stuffed with straw for extra warmth. Finally, the importance of community cannot be overstated. In times of scarcity, or when a family's supplies ran out, it was the community that came to their aid. Sharing and cooperation were crucial for survival. This sense of community was perhaps most visible during the holiday season, where feasts were held and food, drink, and merriment were shared. Despite the harsh conditions, these celebrations provided a sense of hope and respite from the gloom of winter. The resilience and resourcefulness of the medieval peasant during the coldest winters is a testament to human adaptability. Their strategies for survival, from the careful management of resources to the importance placed on community and cooperation, offer a glimpse into the harsh realities of medieval life, but also a reminder of the human capacity for endurance and resilience. As we wrap up this section, let us remember these humble individuals whose daily struggles and triumphs have shaped the course of history. Their survival skills, passed down through generations, are a testament to their strength and ingenuity. And as we drift closer to sleep, let their stories remind us of the warmth and comfort that we are fortunate enough to enjoy today. In the heart of the coldest winter, the medieval peasant's life was marked by an intense struggle for survival. The snow fell ceaselessly, blanketing the landscape in a stunning vista of white. Yet beneath this serene facade, the peasants endured a relentless battle against the elements. With limited resources and technology, they relied heavily on their resourcefulness and community spirit to see them through these harsh times. The crux of their survival strategy was to ensure that they had sufficient food and warmth, two fundamental needs that were inextricably linked. The majority of their diet consisted of grains, particularly barley and oats, which they had harvested in the autumn and stored for the winter. These grains were versatile and could be used to make a variety of foods, such as bread, porridge, and ale. Vegetables like cabbages and turnips, harvested before the first frost, were stored in pits or cellars, preserving them for consumption throughout the winter. However, heating their homes and cooking their food required a constant supply of firewood. The peasants spent the warmer months collecting and storing firewood, ensuring that they had a sufficient amount to last through the winter. This was a grueling task, often involving the entire family. Wood was also essential for a variety of other purposes, such as constructing tools and buildings, so their need for it was constant and pressing. Livestock played a crucial role in the winter survival strategy of the medieval peasant. Animals such as cattle, sheep, and pigs provided not only food, but also other essential resources. Wool from sheep was spun into yarn and woven into warm clothing and blankets. The skins of animals were used to make sturdy shoes and coats, offering vital protection against the biting cold. In dire times, the peasants would slaughter their livestock for meat, a decision not taken lightly, given the importance of these animals for survival. Despite the harsh conditions, the peasants did not endure the winter in isolation. The concept of community was strong, with villagers often working together to ensure everyone's survival. Sharing and bartering were common practices, with surplus goods being exchanged for items that were in short supply. A peasant with an abundance of grain might trade with a neighbour who had extra firewood, for example. This sense of communal responsibility extended to offering help to those in need. It was not uncommon for wealthier villagers to provide food and warmth to those less fortunate. The church also played a significant role in the lives of the medieval peasants, particularly in the winter. The church was often the centre of village life, providing not only spiritual guidance, but also practical assistance. Monasteries and abbeys often had large stores of food and firewood, which they distributed to the needy in times of hardship. The monks, who were often skilled in medicine and healing, also offered care to the sick and the injured. But winter was not just a time of hardship for the medieval peasant. It was also a time of rest and recuperation after the toil of the harvest. With the fields lying dormant beneath the snow, there was time for leisure activities such as storytelling, music, and games. These activities served to lift the spirits of the villagers, providing a welcome respite from the harsh reality of winter. In the face of a brutally cold winter, the medieval peasants' survival was a testament to their resilience and resourcefulness. Through careful planning and cooperation, they managed not only to survive, but also to find moments of joy and celebration amidst the hardship. Their story is a poignant reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the power of community in overcoming adversity. As night fell, the peasants would retreat to the warmth of their homes, huddling around the fire as they shared stories and meals. The soft glow of the fire flickered against the walls, casting long shadows that danced in rhythm with the tales being told. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence. But within their homes, the peasants found warmth, comfort, and companionship, a beacon of hope amidst the winter's chill. As we journey further into the lives of medieval peasants during the coldest winter, we find ourselves amidst a flurry of activities that are essential not just for their survival, but also for their sustenance. The seventh part of our narrative focuses on how these hardy individuals managed to keep themselves warm during the harsh winter months. Firewood was the primary source of heat for medieval peasants. Collecting firewood was not just a chore, it was a necessity. It was an activity that involved the entire family, including the youngest children. When the warmth of summer waned and the chill of autumn started to set in, the peasants would venture out into the woods to gather as much firewood as they could. They would chop down trees, gather fallen branches, and collect twigs and leaves. This activity was not without its dangers. Wild animals, bandits, and the risk of injury were always present, but the need for warmth outweighed these dangers. Once the firewood was collected, it was carefully stacked and stored. The wood needed to be kept dry, so it was often covered with thatch or stored in a woodshed. The wood was a precious commodity. It was used sparingly throughout the winter months, primarily for cooking and heating. The hearth was the heart of the home. It was the source of warmth and comfort. It was where meals were cooked, where stories were shared, and where family bonds were strengthened. Clothing also played a crucial role in keeping the peasants warm. They wore multiple layers to protect themselves from the cold. The outer layer was usually made of wool, a material known for its excellent insulating properties. Underneath the woolen layer, they wore linen garments. Linen was more comfortable against the skin and absorbed any sweat, preventing the body from becoming chilled. The peasants also wore fur-lined boots and gloves to protect their extremities from frostbite. Their homes, too, were designed with the cold in mind. The houses were small, making them easier to heat. They had thick walls made from a mixture of clay, straw, and animal dung. This combination provided excellent insulation. The houses also had small windows to minimize heat loss. At night, the family would huddle together for warmth, often sharing the same bed. Food during the winter months was scarce. The peasants had to rely on what they had stored during the bountiful summer months. They ate a lot of preserved food, such as pickled vegetables and smoked meat. The diet was simple but filling, providing them with the energy they needed to endure the long, cold days. The church also played a role in helping the peasants survive the winter. The church was often the warmest building in the village, and the villagers would gather there for mass. It was also a place where they could find comfort and companionship during the bleak winter months. The church would often distribute alms to the poor, providing them with much-needed food and clothing. Despite the harsh conditions, the peasants managed to find joy and contentment in their lives. They took pleasure in simple things, like a warm fire, a hearty meal, or a lively story. They found strength in their community, supporting each other in times of need. They found solace in their faith, finding hope in the promise of a better tomorrow. As the winter months dragged on, the peasants would eagerly anticipate the arrival of spring. They looked forward to the warmer days, the budding trees, and the promise of a bountiful harvest. But until then, they had to endure. They had to survive the coldest winter. In the next part of our narrative, we'll explore how these resilient individuals prepared for the arrival of spring and the challenges that came with it. We'll delve into their agricultural practices, their religious beliefs, and their social customs as they navigated their way through this challenging period in history. So, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's continue our journey into the lives of medieval peasants during the coldest winter. As we delve deeper into the heart of the coldest winter, It's important to remember the role of the community in a medieval peasant's survival. Each individual in the village had a role to play, and everyone understood that their survival hinged on their ability to work together. The sense of communal interdependence was particularly important during the harsh winter months, when resources were scarce and the cold was relentless. Peasants, for the most part, lived in small, tightly knit communities where everyone knew each other. The community was, in many ways, like an extended family, with each member playing a vital role in its overall survival. The concept of every man for himself was foreign to them. Instead, the prevailing ethos was one of shared responsibility and mutual support. This sense of community was not just a nice ideal, but a practical necessity. During the winter, the community would gather in the village hall, a large structure typically built of wood and thatch, to share stories, play games, and comfort one another through the darkest days of the year. Here, the village elder, who was often the most experienced and wise member of the community, would share tales of past winters, offering advice on how to survive the current one. These gatherings also served as a means of preserving the community's history and passing on valuable knowledge to the younger generations. In addition to these communal gatherings, it was common for the villagers to share their food and other resources. If a family's winter store was running low, it was not unusual for their neighbors to offer them some of their own supplies. This was not seen as charity, but rather as a necessary act of survival. The expectation was that the favor would be returned in kind when the situation was reversed. The role of the manor lord was also critical during this time. They were responsible for maintaining the peace and ensuring the survival of the community. The lord had the authority to ration food and other resources, and to make decisions about work schedules and other matters that affected the community's ability to survive the winter. Lords were expected to lead by example, often sharing their own resources with the community and working alongside the peasants in the fields or in other tasks. Religion also played a significant role in the survival of the community during the winter. The local church was not just a place of worship, but also a place of refuge and support. The priest or bishop would offer spiritual guidance, but also practical assistance. They would often distribute alms to the poor and provide food and shelter to those in need. Church holidays, like Christmas and Epiphany, provided a much-needed respite from the harsh realities of winter, with feasting and celebration offering a reminder of the hope and joy that still existed even in the most difficult times. As we reflect on the challenges and hardships that medieval peasants faced during the coldest winter, it's important to also recognize the strength and resilience they exhibited. Their survival was not just a matter of luck or circumstance, but a testament to their resourcefulness, their determination, and most importantly, their sense of community. Although the winters were harsh and the conditions were often brutal, they persevered, buoyed by the knowledge that they were not alone, but part of a community that was in it together. So as we continue to explore this fascinating period of history, let's remember the lessons that these medieval peasants have to teach us: the importance of community, the power of shared responsibility, and the strength that comes from facing adversity together. As we drift off to sleep, let's carry these lessons with us and let them inspire us to face our own challenges with the same resilience and determination. As we continue to delve into the medieval winters that swept across Europe, we find ourselves in the 9th section of our 4th block, where we will explore how the peasants survived the coldest winter. For you to truly appreciate the resilience and ingenuity of these medieval peasants, it's important to first understand the harsh conditions they endured. In the heart of winter, the countryside would be blanketed in heavy snow, rendering the fields unworkable and the roads nearly impassable. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, and the temperature plunged dramatically, often dropping below freezing. Frostbite and hypothermia were constant threats, and the scarcity of food and fuel made survival all the more challenging. Despite these daunting circumstances, the peasants found ways to endure. They huddled together in their small huts, sharing body heat and scant resources. These homes were rudimentary, often made of wattle and daub with thatched roofs. The walls were thick, providing some insulation from the cold, and the floors were covered in straw to add warmth. A central hearth provided a source of heat and light, around which the family would gather, bundled in layers of woolen clothing and heavy furs. During the coldest winter months, the peasants' diet relied heavily on preserved foods. They consumed dried meats, salted fish, cheeses, and pickled vegetables. Thick, hearty stews made from these preserved items were a staple, providing necessary nutrients and warmth. They also relied on grains, such as barley and oats, stored from the autumn harvest. Baked into bread or boiled into porridge, these grains provided sustenance throughout the harsh winter months. In addition to their ingenuity in surviving indoors, the peasants also had to venture out into the cold for a variety of tasks. They gathered firewood from the surrounding forests, a labor-intensive and often dangerous task in the deep snow and freezing temperatures. They hunted game and fished through the ice, tasks that required great skill and patience. They also tended to their livestock, ensuring the animals were fed and sheltered from the harsh weather. Community was another key aspect of survival during these harsh winters. Villages would come together, sharing resources and supporting one another. They would help each other gather firewood, share preserved food, and look after the sick and elderly. This community spirit, born out of necessity, helped the villagers endure the harshest of winters. Religion also played a significant role in helping the peasants cope with the winter. The church offered solace and hope during these challenging times. Feast days, such as Christmas and Epiphany, provided much-needed respite from the harsh realities of winter. These celebrations included feasting, dancing, and merriment, lifting the villagers' spirits and strengthening their sense of community. Despite the harsh conditions, the peasants found joy and beauty in the winter season. They admired the stark beauty of the snow-covered landscape, the quiet stillness of the forests, and the crisp, cold air. They took pleasure in simple activities such as sledding and ice skating, providing a welcome distraction from their arduous daily lives. In conclusion, the survival of the medieval peasants during the coldest winters was a testament to their resilience, resourcefulness, and community spirit. Through a combination of practical skills, communal support, and unwavering faith, they not only survived but thrived, creating a rich and vibrant culture that continues to fascinate us today. As you drift off to sleep, let these stories of resilience and survival inspire you, reminding you of the strength and adaptability inherent in the human spirit.